And we're pleased to welcome to the Telile Community Television Studios here in Arichat, the leader of Nova Scotia's Liberal Party, the MLA for Yarmouth in its various configurations since 2010, and a cabinet minister in many portfolios in the Stephen McNeil and Ian Rankin governments of the 2000s and into early 2021. We're pleased to welcome Zach Churchill to Telile. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's good to have you. You're making a swing through Cape Breton right now. What kinds of things are you looking for, and what kind of conversations are you having as you hit Cape Breton Island?
Well, we're chatting with individuals and stakeholder groups, and the issues that I'm hearing about here in Cape Breton are pretty consistent with issues that I'm hearing in other parts of the province. People are really concerned about the state of healthcare right now, the state of our emergency rooms. People cannot find a family doctor at this point in time. And the affordability pressures are really starting to mount on households. And people are struggling to make ends meet more than they were before. Even people with two household incomes now, they're counting their pennies a little more than they did before. And with power rates going up, gas price that's going to be going up soon, along with the other inflationary cost increases, people are feeling the squeeze.
Well, we're going to pick up on a number of these issues individually, partly because you have served in the cabinet portfolios that have dealt with a lot of these issues over the years. I want to begin with healthcare, if I can. You served as the Minister of Health in the Liberal government that ruled until 2021. Now, when your party left power at that point, the wait list for a family doctor in Nova Scotia was roughly 40,000. It's now over 100,000, more than that figure. I want to ask you, first of all, as health minister in the past in a Liberal administration, did you see that it could reach this level, that we could be really struggling? Did COVID-19 kind of expose the cracks in Nova Scotia's health system? Basically, comparing where you were then overseeing this system, comparing to where we are now, did you see it coming?
Well, we've certainly seen the system get a lot worse since the election, since the PCs and the Houston government have taken over. They've spent a lot more money on healthcare. They're getting more money from the federal government, but we are actually seeing outcomes get worse. So we've seen the amount of people that need a family doctor shoot up in the province, from one end of the province to the other. We are seeing ERs close twice the rate as it used to. We're seeing wait times increase for ERs and offloading ambulances. Cape Breton now has had the highest increase in offload times for ambulances in the whole province. So we certainly haven't seen anything get better. And of course, there's some challenges in the healthcare system that every government's going to be dealing with. But I do think one of the challenges the current government has is that they're very focused on the politics of healthcare and not necessarily the outcomes of healthcare. So everything that's being spent, the majority of things that they're doing, I think, are to get headlines, to demonstrate that they're doing work in healthcare. But if you actually look at the facts and figures on the ground and talk to people that are experiencing challenges in our emergency rooms or who don't have a family doctor, you get a very different picture.
Now, I wanted to ask you as well, in terms of the various things that the Houston provincial government are doing. Just recently, it was announced that doctors who increased their patient load by as few as 50 would be getting a bonus of $10,000. So it seems like financial incentives and extra spending have been the direction that this government has taken to try to address the situation. The Premier and the Finance Minister, Alan McMaster, the MLA for Inverness just next door, have said repeatedly they're prepared to keep putting the province into debt to try to correct this. Do you get the sense, though, that the funding has to have some direction? And if you were Premier right now, you're hoping to be Premier in a couple of years, what would you be doing differently as opposed to just offering money at the problem?
Well, I mean, they're throwing money at the wall and seeing what sticks. And the fact is that the money that they spent have not resulted in returns for Nova Scotians. So we've got more than twice as many people without a family doctor now. We've got more ER closures. We've got longer wait times. And I think until they focus on some key issues and put some money where it is most needed, we're not going to see the changes that we need to see in healthcare. We're going to be chasing our tail on it. They've got to focus more on family doctors. This recent round of temporary incentives, by the way, is, I think, very reactionary to the fact that the people who need a family doctor has been increasing, and they've been bleeding family doctors from the system over the last 2 years. But a $10,000 incentive isn't going to cut it, I don't think. You know, if you're going to, and the Premier I don't think is very focused on family medicine, because he stood up in the legislature and said the days of having a family doctor from when you're born to when you age is over in Nova Scotia. That's on the record. So obviously they're not really focused on getting people family doctors or on family medicine. And I think if they want to get serious about that, and they need to be serious about it, because when people have access to a family doctor, they're not going into the emergency rooms and putting more pressure on already strapped emergency rooms for things that aren't emergencies. And they're able to access primary care in a way that's going to keep them healthier for a longer period of time. And I think to tackle the family medicine issue, where we have doctors leaving family practice, and they're doing it because there's more economic opportunities for them in the system. We really have to look at the issues that are bothering them. Billing. They do not get compensated for complex cases, for managing people's complex health issues. We have to look at overhead as well. Clare, in my neck of the woods, next to Yarmouth, the municipality has actually stepped in and provided some of the facilities for family doctors to practice. And they are one of the best areas in the province for attaching patients to family doctors. So I think if we look at billing, if we look at overhead for family doctors, instead of these one-off temporary financial incentives, we're actually going to start moving the needle in the right direction and getting more people family doctors and taking pressure off the hospitals and helping people be healthier.
I want to segue from healthcare into housing by saying that housing is often a reason that it's difficult to attract healthcare professionals, and I know that the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health Committee has found that, and they are trying to work with the municipality of Richmond County to try to increase housing availability for people that might look to moving to this area. We're just a year removed from a new ER model being set up at the Straight Richmond Hospital in Evanston, the major hospital serving our area, because they were unable to not only have doctors in on a regular basis, but also several vacancies in the nursing staff as well. So just wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of the importance of housing, not just for serving ERs, but also for just serving the medical community in general in Nova Scotia.
Well, we're in a housing crisis right now. We have less than 1% vacancy rate in the rental market, and we've actually had housing starts, so new houses being built in Nova Scotia, decrease over the last 2 years. So this is not only a problem for recruiting medical professionals because they need to find a place to live, but it's also affecting people's health. We're seeing homelessness increase in Nova Scotia, and not just in Halifax or Sydney in the urban areas. We're seeing it happen in rural Nova Scotia now. When people don't have access to affordable housing and do not have access to food, or financially stressed, they're actually ending up in the hospitals too. So housing is a health issue, and not just from the perspective of having lodgings for medical professionals that we want to recruit, but also with the people that are struggling with finding housing or oftentimes finding themselves sick and in hospital. And you can talk to emergency room docs and they'll tell you they're seeing folks that are dealing with those challenges: food insecurity, housing insecurity, and financial stress show up in the hospital. So we have to have a new strategy for housing.
Now, speaking of housing and of affordable housing in particular, that is a top priority for the municipal leaders here in Richmond County and neighboring Port Hawkesbury. You'd mentioned that you want your party to have a priority on stimulating housing development, not just in the urban areas and HRM, CBRM, but you also would like to see it happen rurally. What would you and your party do to make that happen?
Well, I think the provincial incentives now for development and affordable housing development in particular are really only built for big developers in Halifax. If we want to increase affordable housing stock in rural Nova Scotia, we have to open up those grants. So people, right now, big developers can access up to $50,000 a unit if they're going to keep the apartment affordable that they build for up to 10 years. I think that should be opened up to the whole market. So if you want to put a nanny suite in your basement that's going to be affordable, why can't you access that sort of government incentive to build affordable housing? Because the fact is in rural Nova Scotia, it's a higher risk real estate market usually, and you're not seeing developers build the kind of big scale buildings that our population could actually probably sustain right now. So I think we should open up those grants, make them available for people who want to put a tiny home on their house, an apartment in their basement, or reconfigure their house to put another unit in and to keep them affordable. I think that can help. There's some bigger issues though. I mean, we do have to look at zoning regulations. We have to densify where we're building in villages and town centers. And we're also going to have to support the next generation of Nova Scotians coming up who are becoming young professionals, because they don't believe they're ever going to be able to afford a home in Nova Scotia. And so we really have to think about, okay, what are the needs of this group of young professionals coming up who don't think they're going to be able to afford a home in Nova Scotia? That means they might want to leave. How can we support them to make sure they can get into the housing market in a responsible way, and help them, thrive and live the life they want to live here in Nova Scotia? So there's a number of things I think we have to do. We have to look at home ownership. We have to look at rethinking the incentives to develop affordable housing. And the one thing government also needs to look at is emergency housing for people that are homeless, because the private sector is not going to do that. And government needs to, I think, work with the not-for-profit sector to find areas where we can do emergency housing for people that are really stuck and finding themselves living in tents or on the street, because those people are going to get sick, they're going to end up in the hospital, and they're going to put more pressure on our government services. And if we can help prevent that from happening by giving them shelter, even for a brief period of time, I think it can go a long way for all of us.
While we're talking about affordability, a basic question right now, and we're talking about difficulties for low income and fixed income Nova Scotians, we are on the cusp of the introduction of carbon pricing here in Nova Scotia, and carbon pricing that will drive gas prices up by 14 cents a litre and have an impact on home heating oil costs as well too. Your caucus colleague, Fred Telile from Northside Westmount, sat in this very chair just a couple of weeks ago. We talked to him. He has been referring to the carbon pricing system set to get underway as the Houston carbon tax and the PC carbon tax, going on the premise that when a deadline loomed last August to be able to address this and to provide something differently, it seemed like the PC government waited until the last minute to submit what they described as better than a carbon tax, and it was summarily rejected by the federal government. And we're seeing, even just over the past few days, the 3 Atlantic PC premiers demanding an emergency meeting with the federal government to try to deal with the carbon tax, and the federal government, to nobody's surprise, summarily dismissed that. Your thoughts on the way the province is handling all this and the impact that it's going to have for ordinary Nova Scotians?
People don't realize this, but we've had carbon pricing in Nova Scotia for 4 years now. Under Stephen McNeil, the provincial Liberal government fought back against the carbon tax and negotiated a cap and trade system so that we priced carbon, because we do have to price pollution. We're seeing the impacts of climate change even just this last year in Nova Scotia with Hurricane Fiona, with the wildfires that we had in Halifax, and the largest wildfire ever in our province's history in Shelburne County. We're experiencing it with lobsters that are migrating out of the warmer waters and moving north. And it's going to have profound impacts on our economy, on our lifestyle, on our safety. But how we price carbon really matters. So the provincial Liberal Party has taken the position that a cap and trade system is the best for the province, because we can price carbon with the biggest polluters, raise money to bring in green initiatives, and keep the price off the pumps. And so that cap and trade system resulted in a carbon pricing regime that did our part to combat climate change, that raised money for green energy and renewable, another renewable economy, but also made sure that the price at the pump increase was only 1 cent per litre for 4 years. Tim Houston not only did not negotiate an alternative to the carbon tax that's coming, he actually scrapped cap and trade, the legislation that brought in cap and trade, without a viable alternative. That was a mistake, because now we're going to have the biggest increase in gas prices in the whole country. And I think he did that because it's going to be very easy to attack Liberals over this, because the federal government's brought in carbon pricing. But he really has some responsibility here, because he scrapped the carbon pricing regime that we had, did not have an alternative for carbon pricing. His alternative plan was just to list a bunch of renewable energy sources that he was going to pursue. Hydrogen, offshore wind, and tidal, all of which are in conceptual phases right now. They're not ready to go. And he got rid of the cap and trade system without having an alternative. And I think he did it so he could just beat up Liberals. And I think the political incentive for him outweighed what his responsibility was to the people here to actually find the right alternative for them so that people, particularly in rural Nova Scotia, who have to drive to get to the grocery store, who have to drive to get to work, who don't have access to robust public transit systems, to make sure that they weren't going to be hurt by this, but they are. And the only thing we've really seen from him is posturing and attack ads against Liberals, when really, as the Premier, I think he has a responsibility to do the work, negotiate a better deal, and think these things through. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So I do think he has triggered the carbon tax by getting rid of cap and trade without having a viable alternative.
Now, your party has offered some short-term incentives for the government to consider to help Nova Scotians through this rise in gas prices and home heating oil, specifically putting a freeze on the provincial portion of gasoline prices, but also ensuring that there are lunch programs available at schools to be able to provide for children whose families might be struggling right now.
And cutting income tax.
Exactly, and ending bracket creep as well, too. Now, that being said, should your party resume power within the next couple of years or beyond that, there is a 2030 deadline in terms of Nova Scotia getting off coal and dealing with other aspects of renewable energy. Do you feel that you have the leeway as Liberal leader and as potentially a Liberal Premier to reverse any of the things that are coming into effect on July 1st?
Well, if we have an alternative plan that's going to price carbon, I think we can. We can change the regime. Quebec still has a cap and trade system. They fought to keep their cap and trade system, and they renegotiated it. Now, after 2 years of having a carbon tax, are we going to be able to do that with Ottawa? We don't know. We don't know who's going to be Prime Minister at the time. We don't know who the governing party is going to be. We're going to have a federal election between now and then. So we'll have to wait and see what the situation is. But right now, the Premier can actually provide some financial relief to Nova Scotians who are struggling. We have some of the highest income taxes in the country. We've had population growth and economic growth for 10 years. We should be looking at reducing people's income tax, keeping more money in their bank accounts and in their pockets. We should put at least a temporary freeze on the provincial gas tax to help people manage this increase in gas prices and help keep some of that gas price down for them. And that's something that we can afford to do, I think, temporarily. And a school lunch program. Our party brought in the breakfast program to Nova Scotia. It supports our kids, helps those that aren't getting access to good food at home get a good meal or a snack at school. And we think that needs to be expanded to lunch. And of course, with the price of food going up, that's going to help everybody in our school system. So Tim Houston failed to negotiate an alternative to the carbon tax. So we are going to have higher prices at the pumps. It's going to affect everybody. But he does have some opportunities to reduce the cost of living pressures on people by giving them more of their taxes back instead of blowing it in failed initiatives, by freezing the provincial portion of the gas tax, and by bringing in a universal school lunch program. And unfortunately, he hasn't moved on any of those things. And I don't think he takes the affordability situation very seriously, unfortunately, for people.
One more quick thing I wanted to speak to you about in terms of renewable energy. We're just a few hours removed from your party's environmental and climate change critic, Ian Rankin, releasing a statement on behalf of the party regarding the Premier's recent comments that the province could probably afford to move away from the Atlantic Loop program that would be transversing renewable energy all the way around the Atlantic provinces and Quebec. $4.5 billion put on the table by the federal government to contribute to what's estimated to be a $6.8 billion capital cost. Premier Houston once again saying that there are other ways of generating renewable energy. So your thoughts on the idea that this project, which had already been in jeopardy with Nova Scotia Power threatening to walk away last fall after the provincial government put a cap on power rates, you're concerned right now that the program could be left twisting in the wind?
Well, people need to understand that the Atlantic Loop is the only renewable project that's ready to go right now. That's the most economical for the taxpayers and ratepayers as well. So the Atlantic Loop will help us get off coal more quickly and importantly, help us stabilize and reduce over time power rates for Nova Scotians. So the Premier tried to intervene with the power rate increases unsuccessfully. He actually made the situation worse. And now we're going to see a 14% increase in power rates along with a 14-cent a liter increase in gas prices. So Nova Scotians are going to be hit with these two increases in cost of living, power and fuel. And the Premier does not have an alternative to the Atlantic Loop. You know, what he has said is he's pursuing hydrogen, nuclear, tidal, and offshore wind. Okay, that's great, but all of those things are conceptual right now. There's no money ready to go to implement them. They're years out from development. And we've got this opportunity now with the Atlantic Loop where there's federal money on the table, where we're sharing the costs with other provinces, and it's going to help us get off expensive coal and get to a renewable energy source, and that's going to stabilize and reduce power rates over time. So he's again choosing to fight with Ottawa and choosing politics over people, in my opinion. And instead of doing the work and getting it done, he'd rather be in a fight with the Prime Minister over this instead of actually saying, okay, there's a lot of value for Nova Scotians here. This is going to hit our renewable targets, but also stabilize and reduce power rates over the long run. And he should, work with the federal government and get moving with this, because there is no viable alternative right now, and people will see that. And we will not hit our renewable targets, and power rates are probably going to keep going up.
We have talked about several different issues over the last little bit. I want to wrap this up by coming back to politics, which many people might see as a bit of a dirty word, but you are now coming on your one-year anniversary of being the leader of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. There seems to be some suggestion with recent polling that the numbers are starting to work in both your favor and the party's. Narrative Research's quarterly report has an 8-point gap now between the Houston PCs and your party at 31%, they at 39%, but this is the smallest gap we've seen since the previous election campaign. Do you get the sense that both you as leader and your party are getting some traction? And if that's the case, what do you feel that you and your party have to do to be able to close the gap and be able to present yourself as a real viable alternative government as opposed to simply an opposition party?
I think we're focused on the issues that matter to people. We're talking about getting people family doctors. And again, a lot more people in Nova Scotia had a family doctor when we were in government. As many challenges as we had in healthcare, there's more than twice as many people now without a family doctor. And that is in part because of the Houston government's, I think, neglect of the family medicine issue. So we have to be talking about the things that matter. Access to primary care and family medicine. We're talking about people's health, because we're not going to fix our healthcare system unless we start helping people be healthier. And that means doing early screens for cancer. We have a high rate of lung cancer in Nova Scotia. We should be screening for lung cancer early. We should be screening for GI cancers early. We should be screening for cardiovascular issues early, because the majority of the money that we're spending in our healthcare system is in the last 3 months, unfortunately, of somebody's life. If we can start focusing some more of our money on people's health and preventative measures, it's going to take pressure off the healthcare system. It's also going to help people live longer and be happier and healthier. We're also talking about affordability. We think it's time in Nova Scotia to let people keep more of their own money that they're working for. We're at a point right now where we can reduce income taxes in Nova Scotia, and that's going to help people make ends meet who are struggling. It's also going to help have more money in circulation in our economy, and we think it's also related to people's health, because when they're financially stressed, it impacts their health in a lot of serious ways. So we have been focused on these issues, and it's nice to see the polls move a bit. I think people are starting to see that, well, Premier Houston had a campaign plan for healthcare. He has not had an actual plan to fix healthcare in Nova Scotia. In fact, the situation is getting worse. And I think people, hopefully in a year and a half to 2 years, will be ready for an alternative. And we'll certainly be ready with our plan to run on the right ideas at the right time for the province.
Well, there are a lot of moving parts to a discussion like this and to a job such as yours, so we appreciate you taking some time to come in and share your thoughts with us. Zach Churchill, thank you so much for joining me today here at Telile Community Television.
Thank you, Adam. Really nice to be here, and look forward to coming back. And merci beaucoup, and bonjour à tout le monde ici à Arichat et Richmond.
De rien, de rien.
Okay.
Zach Churchill is the leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party and the leader of the opposition for Nova Scotia. We're speaking to him right here at our Telile Community Television studios in Arichat.